My parents were married, I want to say about March 18th, 1957. And I've always had this idea that there was a bit of a courtship. You might not believe it, but I actually don't think a lot about my parents. Like this is a project I've taken on, but like what their dating life was like, I don't think I ever really considered it. But it really sounds kind of crazy going through their different letters. A lot of these things seem really freeform, handwritten, and they're not all there. What I find really bizarre is that a lot of these letters talk about like how much they miss each other and all that predictable stuff. But then there's other things about my father saying like, I thought about being unfaithful to you tonight. Like, why would you write that? And then at the same time, including odd things like, I bought a chapstick today and I got that stain out of my shirts. I think I mentioned that my father was not exactly a great romantic in a lot of his letters, and it shows. He does use the word love a lot more, like a lot, almost like he's trying to convince her. But then in like October of 1956, he's saying something about, hey, you know what? If you want to go out with Ray, go out with Ray. So I don't know what my mom is playing at in a weird way. I feel like she's using some sort of 50s era, like how to catch a man strategies, which they were really young. In 1956, in October, that means my father would have been about, 25? And that means that my mom would have been about 22. And man, some of these letters going back and forth, apparently my mother occasionally sent 3 letters in a day, each of them kind of unedited. And I would edit them. You know, a lot of the stuff that they had to say back and forth wasn't all gold. But a lot of them also talk about, you know, like my mother feeling blue and having some depression and a lot of these things that for me became much bigger issues later on. But I just don't understand the rush at all. I mean, if we look historically at the reasons to rush a marriage back then, it wasn't happening. Whatever it might have happened, I haven't really contemplated that and thankfully have not found evidence of that. But, sorry, I'm just saying that I don't want to think about my parents' sex lives, and I'm really grateful that going through the archives, I have never found anything at all like a sex picture or videos. Anyway, the letters clearly went back and forth. There were clearly a lot of letters from my mother. My father refers to them repeatedly. In his letters to her, he says something like, hey, you just sent me 3 letters. Nice to hear from you. Or, hey, you just called me and, hey, nice to hear from you. It really matters that, you know, and he's constantly saying all these things interspersed with all of his ideas and plans and different things about the future and stuff that really kind of is not as romantic as, say, Smitty's letter that briefly, preciously, 1 page that quotes Pushkin and uses somebody else's words. My father is decidedly relying upon his own words for these. At the same time, there is an urgency to it all. Like, even as they're talking about it in October, my dad is talking about like how maybe we'll get married in January. I don't know why. I just thought all of this stuff would take more time to plan. But in February of the previous year, that my parents seem like they're kind of barely even talking to each other or strangers or something like that. Because my mom seems to have asked like, hey, are we not even friends? We haven't been talking or whatever. And my father sends her back a really badly typed letter. Kind of looks bad and poorly thought out. And that's the thing. These letters really look poorly considered. And I'm just amazed at what my mom chose to keep. And I'm really find myself wondering, like, what's the story that she's telling herself as she goes back over these things? My father does say he loves her a lot. Maybe this was different when they were younger, but this is not a word I heard my father use very much. And it's not like I said, my father had other ways of telling you, like, he cared about you or whatever. I love you wasn't exactly like his vocabulary. And I think it was just not the way that his parents spoke to him and the way everything else. And I'm sure that he actually loved her, but it was also this craziness about it all that just seems so fast and so rushed. Maybe it's just because it's all so complicated and everything now, but even so, like, I don't know, A wedding dress takes a minute, doesn't it? Or was it really that different then? My mom kind of had a big white blown out wedding dress kind of thing. It was a bit of a deal. It was clearly a big party. It must have taken some kind of planning, but it also really took everybody by surprise. Pearl, my mother's mother, sent her one letter that my mom saved that is basically like, you know what, you better be a better person, and this is all really rushed. My time is running out, but I still find time to write to you. There isn't much to write to you because you've always had the benefit of my advice when you didn't want it. I hope you have a very happy marriage. I want to thank you for all the things you've done. Try to be sweeter and kinder than you've been. Now, at least Pearl has sort of a sense of, I think she at least considers that other people might read this, whereas I don't think my dad is. And then we have Smitty's letter. He's like, whoa, what's going on? And then we have Ray, who's like still dating her. I mean, shoot, small wonder he ran off with my aunt if my mom was just like, well, you know, I'm kind of holding you in reserve in case this other guy who's off in Texas or Oklahoma doesn't work out. There was just this thing, I think, of my mother wanting to get out of the house. And she was tired of being there and wanted to be independent, to the point where she was moving out of her own house and into what would then become her mother-in-law's house, which wasn't that far away and couldn't have been that easy. And as I pointed out before, was actually the exact same looking house. She was still living on the second floor. She went from the second floor of a Levitt-style little salt box house to like 5 miles away to the second floor of a Levitt-style salt box house. And the classic reasons for why somebody might rush at the time really weren't there, that I know about, because my oldest brother wasn't born until 1959. But I think she was also she was living with her mom and was just going crazy by it, to the point where moving in with my dad's parents, or mother and stepfather, seemed like a better idea for her. All this urgency to get away from home and to have her own time standing on her own probably meant my mom didn't do a whole lot of advanced planning. And by the time they got married, it looked like a great affair, honestly. It looked wonderful, but, you know, it was the 1950s. You put on a dress and a suit and throw enough alcohol at it, it's going to look like a party for sure.